A drill sergeant humiliated the new consultant, thinking he was just a washed-up martial artist. He didn't know he was Steven Seagal. The lesson he learned wasn't in a dojo, it was in the dirt. The helicopter's blades beat a rhythmic assault against the blistering desert air, kicking up a vortex of sand and grit. Below, Scorpion Ridge Training Center sprawled across the cracked earth like a raw scar, a desolate grid of concrete bunkers and shimmering barbed wire under a merciless sun. This was the place the military sent its toughest recruits to be broken and rebuilt. Lately, it had become a place where discipline went to die. As the chopper settled, Steven Seagal stepped out. He didn't wear fatigues. Instead, a simple black tactical jacket was zipped over a dark shirt, paired with durable jeans and sturdy boots. His presence was immediate and imposing. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with a deliberate economy that defied the chaotic swirl of dust. His dark hair was pulled back in his signature ponytail, and his face was an impassive mask, his eyes missing nothing as they scanned the base. He was a stone dropped into a turbulent pond, silent, yet his impact was felt instantly. In his office, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation, Colonel Hawkins looked like a man who had run out of moves. Maps covered his walls, and his desk was a battlefield of reports. He sized up Seagal, not with skepticism, but with the last flicker of hope. "This place is a powder keg, Mr. Seagal," Hawkins began, his voice low and frayed. "The discipline is gone. Utterly gone. The problem has a name, Sergeant Trent. The man's a decorated soldier, a bulldog in combat, but he's turned that reputation into a crown. He rules through ego, not leadership. The recruits worship his swagger, and it's rotting this base from the inside out." Seagal stood by the window, his large frame silhouetted against the harsh light. He watched a group of recruits jogging in a disorganized cluster, their chatter audible even from here. His gaze was steady, penetrating. He didn't need to ask questions, he absorbed the situation in silence. "You want me to fix him?" Seagal's voice was a low rumble, seeming to come from his chest more than his throat. It wasn't a question of capability, but of intent. "Fix him." "No," Hawkins corrected, rubbing his temples. "I want you to fix this." He gestured vaguely at the window, at the entire base. "Show them what real strength looks like. Not the loud, chest-thumping kind. The quiet kind. The kind that lasts. Your presence alone, it might be enough to shake them awake." Seagal finally turned from the window, his eyes locking onto the colonel's. After a long moment that stretched the silence thin, he gave a single, slow nod. "I'll be a tactical advisor," he stated, the terms clear and non-negotiable. "No rank, no spotlight. My name stays off every roster. I observe. I advise. I will only step in when it is absolutely necessary." Hawkins managed a faint smile of relief. "Deal. Just, be warned. Trent has a mouth on him, and he doesn't like mysteries." Seagal's expression didn't change. "I am not a mystery," he said, his voice flat. "I am a solution." The next morning, the assembly yard was a theater of chaos. Recruits shuffled into a semblance of formation, their gear a mix of regulation and personal preference. The air hung heavy with the smells of diesel and nervous sweat. On the edge of the formation, almost blending into the shadows of a supply truck, stood Seagal. His hands were tucked into his jacket pockets, his posture relaxed but rooted. He was an island of calm in a sea of adolescent noise, unnoticed by the recruits who were more concerned with the blistering heat than the silent observer in their midst. Then Sergeant Trent strode into the center of the yard. He was in his mid-30s, built like a CrossFit champion, with a fresh buzz cut and a smirk that screamed arrogance. His fatigues were impeccably starched, his boots polished to a blinding sheen. He paced before the recruits, his voice a weapon, sharp and loud. His eyes scanned the ranks, searching for any sign of weakness, any nail that needed hammering down. And then they found Seagal. Trent stopped dead. The smirk widened into something predatory. "Well, look what we have here," he boomed, ensuring every ear was on him. "Recruits, take a good, long look. We have a special guest today. A living relic from the golden age of VHS tapes." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the formation. Phones, already in hand, were subtly raised to capture the impending spectacle. Trent swaggered closer, his boots crunching on the gravel, stopping a few feet from Seagal. "What's your deal, old-timer?" Trent sneered. "Lost your way to the yoga retreat? Or are you here to teach us how to meditate our way through a firefight?" He turned to the recruits, playing to his audience. "Let's give a warm Scorpion Ridge welcome to Ponytail Papa." The laughter was louder this time, bolder. "Heard they call him Grandpa Dojo," one recruit whispered to his friend, who snickered in reply. The air crackled with the cruel energy of a public shaming. But Seagal didn't move. He didn't flinch. His gaze remained level, his face a mask of utter neutrality. He seemed less like a target and more like a mountain, indifferent to the wind howling at its peak. His stillness was unnerving. It was an absence of reaction so profound it became an action in itself. Trent's grin faltered for a fraction of a second. "Cat got your tongue, Zen master," he pressed, circling now. "Or are you just here to watch real men work?" Seagal's rucksack slid from his shoulder to the ground with a soft thud. He straightened up, his movement fluid and economical. The crowd didn't notice the subtle shift in his posture, the way his feet settled, grounding him to the earth in a classic kami stance, but Hawkins, watching from his office, saw it and held his breath. Finally, Seagal spoke. His voice was low, yet it cut through the murmuring and the wind with chilling clarity. "A barking dog does not always bite," he said, his eyes locked on Trent. "But the silent one, you should fear." The laughter died. The words, calm and heavy with meaning, hung in the air. For the first time, Trent looked genuinely thrown off balance. He saw no anger in Seagal's eyes, no fear, only a deep, placid certainty that was more intimidating than any threat. The sergeant's jaw tightened. He wanted to escalate, to turn this physical, but something in Seagal's immovable presence held him back. The silent consultant had won the first round without moving an inch. Trent couldn't let it go. The consultant's quiet defiance was a stone in his shoe, a public challenge to his authority. He decided to break the old man not with words, but with sheer physical punishment. He announced a special readiness drill, a grueling ordeal designed to weed out the weak and, in his mind, humiliate the man he called Grandpa Dojo. Under a sun that hammered the desert floor into an anvil, the recruits were put through hell. They rucked for miles over treacherous, rocky terrain with 50-pound packs, crawled through thick, sucking mud pits, and sprinted past walls of roaring flames. Men half Seagal's age were dropping, their faces beet red, vomiting from exhaustion. Trent was in his element, screaming at them to get up, to move faster, but his eyes kept flicking back to Seagal. The consultant was a study in efficiency. He didn't run, he moved with a steady, ground-eating pace, his breathing deep and rhythmic. His steps were measured, never wasting an ounce of energy. When he reached the mud pit, he didn't dive in. He moved through it with uncanny balance, his core so stable he barely seemed to sink, emerging on the other side with minimal grime. He passed the walls of fire without so much as a flinch, the heat washing over his impassive face. He was among the first to finish, his breathing controlled, his jacket barely showing a sweat stain. He simply stood at the finish line, waiting. The recruits saw it. Their smirks had long since vanished, replaced by looks of grudging awe. "That ain't normal," a lanky kid named Daniels muttered to his friend, Ruiz. "He didn't even get dirty." Trent saw it too, and it stoked his rage into a white-hot fire. This silent old man wasn't just resisting, he was excelling, making a mockery of Trent's brutal test through sheer, effortless competence. That night, the retaliation was personal. Seagal returned to his small, Spartan room to find it vandalized. His rucksack was on the floor, its tough canvas slashed open by a knife. But the real message was on the small mirror above the sink. Scrawled in thick, black grease paint were the words, "Your Zen crap dies here." It was a direct attack on his philosophy, his very essence. Anyone else would have stormed to the colonel's office, demanding retribution. Seagal stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking it all in. Then, he calmly walked to the sink, found a clean rag, and methodically wiped the grease from the mirror until it was spotless. He picked up his slashed bag, examined the damage without emotion, and set it aside. Pulling the thin blanket from the cot, he spread it neatly on the cold concrete floor, sat in a meditative posture, and closed his eyes. He gave his tormentors nothing. No anger. No fear. No reaction. He denied them their victory. Word of the vandalism spread through the barracks like a virus. By morning, the whispers in the mess hall were different. "That's low, man." Even for Trent, Daniel said, pushing eggs around his plate. He and Ruiz had looked up Steven Seagal online the night before, finding old action movie clips and cryptic articles about him training law enforcement. The mystery deepened. "I don't know what his deal is," Ruiz said quietly, "but he's not just some washed-up actor. And Trent's scared of him. That's why he's doing this." Across the hall, Trent sat with his cronies, laughing a little too loudly. But his eyes kept darting towards the door, expecting, perhaps even hoping for, a confrontation. It never came. The silent consultant had absorbed his best shot and given nothing back. And in that silence, Trent's control over the base began to crack. Sunday morning arrived, hot and thick with tension. Trent, desperate to reclaim his dominance, had orchestrated a combat training showcase for the entire base. Bleachers creaked under the weight of staff and off-duty soldiers. It was a spectacle, and Trent was the main event. He stood in the center of a cleared circle of dirt, stripped to a black tank top, his muscles gleaming with oil and sweat. He grabbed a loudspeaker. "All right, Scorpion Ridge," his voice boomed. "Time to see some real action. We've got a special challenge today. Our resident philosopher, Grandpa Dojo, is going to give us a little demonstration." He pointed directly at Seagal, who stood at the edge of the crowd, his posture unchanged from any other day. The crowd roared, a mix of cheers and nervous murmurs. Phones were up, recording from every angle. "What's it gonna be, old man?" Trent taunted. "Step up, or do I have to come over there and drag you out?" A heavy silence fell. Seagal's jaw was a hard line. He wasn't angry, he was resolved. With slow deliberation, he set his rucksack on the ground and stepped into the circle. The air crackled. This was it. Trent bounced on the balls of his feet, cracking his knuckles. "Just a little friendly sparring," he sneered. "Let's see if that dance class stuff works in the real world." He charged. It wasn't a sparring match, it was a lesson. Trent threw a haymaker, a wild, powerful punch meant to end things in a single, brutal blow. But for Seagal, it was an attack in slow motion. He didn't block or dodge. He flowed. In a single, fluid movement that seemed to defy physics, a classic Aikido Irimi entry, he moved inside the arc of the punch, his body brushing past Trent's. He caught Trent's wrist, and using the man's own momentum against him, executed a perfect Shihanage, four-corner throw. To the stunned crowd, it looked as if Trent had tripped over his own feet and thrown himself violently to the ground. The yard was dead silent. Trent scrambled up, his face a mask of fury and confusion. Lucky shot, he spat and charged again, this time leading with a powerful knee strike. Seagal sidestepped with minimal effort, his hand darting out to capture Trent's wrist once more. A small, almost imperceptible twist, a kotegeshi lock, and Trent's body contorted in pain, forcing him to his knees with a choked gasp. Seagal loomed over him, his expression unchanged. "Your anger is a weapon," he said, his voice low and calm. "You're just using it on yourself." He released the hold. Enraged and utterly humiliated, Trent let out a roar and lunged for a final, desperate tackle. Seagal met the charge not with force, but with perfect balance. As Trent crashed into him, Seagal performed a flawless tension-H, heaven and earth throw. One hand guided Trent's head upward while the other directed his body downward. Trent was lifted off his feet and slammed onto his back, the air exploding from his lungs. The fight was over. It had lasted less than 30 seconds. Seagal stood over the wounded, defeated sergeant. He leaned down, his voice for Trent's ears alone, yet its intensity seemed to carry across the silent yard. Being a soldier isn't about being the loudest man in the room. It's about control. It's about purpose. You wear this uniform to serve something greater than your own ego. You serve the people who trust you to protect them. You let them down when you forget that. He stepped back, the lesson delivered. Trent lay in the dirt, his chest heaving, his pride shattered into a million pieces. The fight was over, but the real impact was just beginning. The silence that followed the takedown was absolute, broken only by the desert wind. The recruits stood frozen, their phones still pointed at the scene, but the giddy excitement was gone, replaced by a profound, collective shock. A few soldiers in the front, instinctively, snapped to attention. Colonel Hawkins descended from the bleachers, his boots crunching on the gravel with grim purpose. He walked to the center of the yard, his presence reclaiming command. He looked at the recruits, his gaze hard, then settled it on Seagal, who stood as calmly as if he'd just been discussing the weather. "All of you need to understand what you just witnessed," Hawkins' voice boomed, carrying a weight it hadn't had in months. "This man, this consultant, you think he's just some old martial artist?" He paused, letting the question hang in the thick air. "This is Steven Seagal. And years ago, the president awarded him the Presidential Award for Tactical Innovation. Why? Because the close-quarters combat and defensive tactics systems that nearly every federal and special operations team in this country uses, he designed them. The very techniques you are failing to master, he invented." A wave of stunned realization washed over the crowd. Jaws dropped. Phones were lowered. The lanky recruit, Daniels, let out a low whistle. "Told you," he breathed to Ruiz, who could only shake his head in disbelief. They hadn't been watching a fight, they'd been watching the master practice his art. Trent, still on the ground, looked as though he'd been physically struck by the words. The red on his face wasn't from exertion, it was the deep, burning flush of total humiliation. He slowly pushed himself to his feet, avoiding eye contact with anyone, and walked with heavy steps toward the barracks, disappearing without a word. His reign was over. The crowd began to disperse, but the atmosphere was forever changed. A young private, one who had laughed loudest at the "ponytail papa" jokes, hesitantly approached Seagal. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the dirt. He snapped a salute, clumsy but sincere. "Sir," he stammered. I'm sorry. For my disrespect." Seagal returned the salute with a slow, deliberate nod. "There is no need for apology," he said, his voice softer now. "Only the need to do better tomorrow." The private nodded, his shoulders straightening, and walked away with a newfound purpose. Before the sun had set, the videos were everywhere. The shaky footage, uploaded by dozens of recruits, went viral. The hashtags exploded, hashtag the Unmovable Object, hashtag Aikido Master, hashtag Scorpion Ridge Showdown. But it was a clip Daniels uploaded that captured the world's attention. It showed the fight, but he had edited it to focus on Seagal's final words to Trent, adding a simple caption, "This is strength. This is honor." It was shared by veterans, active-duty soldiers, and civilians alike, turning a moment of discipline into a national conversation about the true meaning of being a warrior. The soul of Scorpion Ridge had been reset. Morning drills were no longer a circus of bravado. They were quiet, focused, precise. The recruits moved with an intensity that came from within, mimicking the calm control they had witnessed. A few days later, Trent appeared at Seagal's open doorway. His uniform was immaculate, his posture rigid. He stood at attention. "Sir," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I was wrong. I abused my rank and I disrespected the uniform. If you are willing, I would like to learn from you." Seagal, who was cleaning an old knife, looked up. He rose, walked to Trent, and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "The path begins," he said quietly, "when you realize you are lost." He didn't need to say more. Trent nodded once, a world of understanding passing between them, and left, his back a little straighter. A week after his arrival, the helicopter returned, cutting through the dawn. Seagal emerged from his quarters, his rucksack, now stitched up, slung over his shoulder. He walked across the yard, expecting to leave as quietly as he had come. He was wrong. As he passed the training field, the entire base was already there, lined up in perfect formation. At some unseen signal, they snapped to attention. A forest of arms rose in a single, unified salute. It was silent. It was powerful. It was respect. At the front stood Trent. His voice, once used for taunts, now rang out with clarity and conviction. "Honor doesn't need a voice," he shouted. And hundreds of voices roared back in unison, "Honor doesn't need a voice." Seagal paused, returned the salute with a slow nod that acknowledged Trent, and then turned and walked to the waiting chopper without looking back. Later, on his desk, Colonel Hawkins found a single sheet of paper. On it, in neat handwriting, was a final lesson: the ultimate goal of fighting is to not have to fight at all. That story, the story of the silent consultant, became a legend. It reminds us that in a world obsessed with noise, true strength is often found in the quiet. It's in the control, the discipline, and the courage to stand for something without having to shout about it. It's a lesson that extends far beyond the wire fences of a military base. What did you take away from this? What does true strength look like to you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, please comment with respect for all those who serve, in any capacity. If stories like this resonate with you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Because the most powerful lessons are often the ones spoken in silence.